Hello, hello. Welcome again back to the podcast, Who's at the Table, where we talk about our blackness in nerd culture. As always, I am joined by my fellow hosts. We have Chris,
What up? What up?
Lee,
West Side.
RK. Thanks again, gentlemen, for joining us. Today, I'd like to discuss a little bit about history, the history of blackness and how it has affected nerd culture. Lee, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about board gaming per se, specifically, and how you understand your blackness affecting your new environment in the board game
Sure,
industry.
I'll start off. So there's two things. Um, you're into whatever your nerdness is, and you're in a black body. So you have to look at it through that lens, right? Because wherever you show up in the room, they don't see you as a nerd first; they see you as black first, right? So so all of the baggage that comes with that, you have to deal with it, and especially if you're black and you're male. So I uh, grew up in a pretty much mixed neighborhood. I mean, it was a black neighborhood in Detroit and a mixed neighborhood when I was in Tampa, predominantly white and Latino, mostly Cuban. Um, so when I was in Detroit, it was it was other black nerds being nerdy together, playing D&D, um, uh, and getting together as 8, 9 year old kids, But I was lucky that I had the cushion of popular culture around Star Wars, right? Because Star Wars had just came out, so we had Star Wars, we had Battlestar Galactica, so people knew of it, and I was able as a kid to navigate that space. But you also had, it wasn't as well defined as it is now. I think when I first noticed the difference when somebody called me a Trekkie, because I liked Star Trek, and I did, that kind of stuff. That's when I realized that there was a distinct difference involved. But the friends that I made and the people that I associated with were people who had a like interest with me. So there were other black kids that were into the same thing that I was into, and it broke off into like either you were had really good hand-eye coordination, you're into sports, but if you're a little chubby or if you were asthmatic or had any kind of health problems, you were relegated to the nerd table, right? So it was like a group of misfits and casts off that weren't good enough to be, um, the popular kid, I guess, is how it
Isn't that the
translated
Steve
through
Urkel
school.
stereotype?
What's that?
That's the Steve Urkel stereotype.
Yeah, but it wasn't, because we had all different types of kids. Not
Yeah,
everybody wore glasses. You know,
yeah.
like even if you were into art, like we had some kids that were really good at drawing, but they were relegated to the nerd table. You know, I mean, it was like sports were like the pinnacle of what the cool kid was when I was growing up, right? And so nerd culture kind of evolved in our social circle that way, you know. So if you
So
weren't going out playing little league, if you didn't have a uniform, if you weren't playing baseball, basketball, or football, like in an organized league, I'm not talking about going down with your friends and playing in the lot because that's what we did. We had a grass lot and we all went and played. Everybody played sports, but there were kids that were like their parents definitely had them on a athletic trajectory that this was going to be a profession for them, right? And for us, I was like, I want to be an astronaut, and my friend was like, well, I want to be a um, he wanted to be a geneticist so he could do cloning, and like people like
Jeez.
even as a little kid, and I remember my one friend, um, he was like, there was an article about the Hadron Collider being built, and how when it was finished, he'd be just graduating college. And he was like, "Yeah, man, I want to be a physicist." And if you had any kind of outside dreams that didn't involve sports, you were considered a nerd, right? You know,
Yeah.
so those are the type of pressures that were put on younger people in in our group around trying to fit in to a larger projection of what you could be and what you should be. And if you didn't fit into that, um, if you didn't fit into that narrative, then you got pretty much ostracized, right? You
Yeah.
know, so I think a
What
lot
what
of
time
us.
period is this around? I don't like trying to date you,
No,
but
I'm thinking the 80s
it's
and 90s, right? Then you had people who were like, when when hip hop music started, right? I mean, it was all about being enlightened and being educated and about bettering yourself. And then all of a sudden, rap just took over, right? Then it was about gangsters and thugs and being hard versus being educated. Because I remember when hip hop started, and there was no hardcore gangster rap. That was something that came much later on, you know. And you know,
not
and
something you grew up on.
what's that?
It's not something that your generation grew up on. It's something our generation grew up on.
Right, yeah. So what you guys were handed in the second half of that whole thing was a bastardization of what it should have been, right? You know, and you still have people like Common, and you still have people like Eric B and Rakim. You still have people like KRS One. I mean, those were the original, like Busta Rhymes, Leisure of the New School. I mean, these were all. This was all groundbreaking, original stuff when I was a kid, when I was younger, when I was a teenager, right?
What happened? We got mumble rap now.
Yeah, and it just devolved because it got into the hands of people that weren't us, you know.
I
And we
like
can
that. I
and we
like
can
that
look
saying
at
you said
that same
devolved.
lens around nerd culture. Are other people dictating to us through media what we should be as black nerds, as blurs, right? You know, or
Yeah.
do we hold on to our culture and dictate what it should be? Because I know there's a lot of people infiltrating and perpetrating inside this culture because social media they can hide behind an avatar and they may not be what that avatar is. You know,
Yeah. Cat catfishing and internet trolls
yeah,
and
catfishing and internet trolling, right? So I know a lot of black nerd groups are really protective of their membership because of that. Because you have a lot of people that aren't black trying to infiltrate those groups and causing a lot of shit. So
well,
I
and then
think
and
being black and being in nerd culture, uh, no matter what sect you're in, um, requires um, a lot of fortitude around protecting that identity and not letting other people define you, right? As less than. So I think that's the important part of that question that you asked. And also, so maintaining a knowledge and a desire and an interest in a subculture, but at the same time being unapologetically black.
Anyone out there interested, Lee turned 99 yesterday and Chris turned 60. So that's the generational gap that we had.
Yeah.
But no, just to streamline the thinking a little bit.
Well, I started when I was
Essentially, I
8. I mean,
suppose,
I started as a young kid, so you know,
like 100 years ago.
100 years ago. Correct.
But yeah, just to streamline the thinking a little bit. So I essentially, and I'll take this to you, Chris, is what I'm asking is your blackness. Did you see it as something that maybe could be a part of the new environment you found yourself in when you were first discovering the nerd things that you enjoy, your gaming and so on and so forth, or did you find yourself out on the outside looking in?
so I was I grew up in a primarily white neighborhood like RK and you guys like, and I went to school in a primarily white school, and I did at sports. I was a three-sport athlete. I was also a nerd. I did science, Olympiad, and yearbook, and all this other stuff. And I was like, I was kind of just well-rounded. But in the nerd community, when I found myself, because like I was a foster kid, and we weren't allowed to play video games. You know what I mean? We weren't allowed to, as a foster kid. Even when I was adopted, my parents would let their white children that were biologically theirs have things, do things more than the colored children that they adopted, right? Which is kind of fucked up, but that's just how it happened. Same thing going into my high school years. My quote unquote parents that I call my parents to date, they'll get me like a scarf or something. They'll get their biological kids a new fucking TV. So like me growing up, I've always seen the disparity between my color and the people around me, and instead of speaking out against it, I've been more just accepting it. When I joined the military is when I actually found my place. You know what I mean? Because I come from a little town of 4,000 or 5,000 people, and the town over only had one black family, and there's like 6 black kids in my school. You know what I mean? The next areas that have black people are 30, 40 minutes away, and you didn't intermingle. I didn't have a car when I was growing up, until
Right.
I reached those years. So I didn't, and it's not like you're like, oh, I'm from Whitehall, because at that point I'm already affluent in high school when I'm starting to drive. I'm already working. You know what I mean? I had a white girlfriend. I'm not going into black neighborhoods just trolling around to find people that look like me, and because that's how you get in a fight. You know what I mean? And it's really weird because the black community, you have to find a niche and you have to have some intro in the black community, whether it's another black person inviting you into their space to take part of that. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I want to do here. Like, the hard part of being in nerd culture is you're that black kid that, like me, stumbled into a store and I had a great time and they accepted me, but I still got the bigotry and the racism, and I just let it roll off my back. But most of the time, you're that black kid that stumbles into a store and the bigotry and racism pushes you away. And the only way you're going to overcome that is if someone else of color that looks like you accepts you and brings you there. It's the same thing with anything in our community. There has to be something that lays that groundwork for that kind of like, oh, cool, me too. You know what I mean? And I think I kind of think like this is rolling into UL. That's where anime plays a part. Like, even though black culture and anime is mostly around the Japanese culture, black people enjoy anime, but oh, you got a Dragon Ball Z tattoo? How about this? What about this? Or did you see that last week's episode of Dark? You can go anywhere in a black neighborhood and spark up a conversation about anime, and then you guys are already hanging out.
So, Chris, this brings up an interesting question. Do you think that black people gravitate towards Japanese animation because it's not white American culture, even though it's just as racist?
I think it's a lot. The Japanese in their culture isn't as blatantly racist as a lot of white culture can be. You know what I mean? They're willing to nod and fucking, bow to you and go on their way and not say some nasty shit to your face. Where you get a lot of people that are telling you to go back to your country, go back to your continent, and all of a sudden, like, open racist are open racist. I dated a girl in high school. Her father was openly racist, and her mom knew about me and her, but her mom didn't support him in that fact. So she didn't say shit to dad. You know what I mean? But we couldn't be together just for the fact that I was black. Like, even we dated for years. But we knew growing up and getting older, it would have never worked out because her father would have disowned her and she loved her dad.
Just to expand a little bit on that question, really, something I've certainly found true of myself and other fans of anime is that we gravitate towards genuine, real stories that we can relate in some way or another. And I think what with their stories is tell them unashamedly. Whatever those stories are, they don't hide or sweep anything under the rug. From what I found personally is that they tell their stories, and it's coming from their culture and their eyes and how they see things, and it's not filtered with trying to please this crowd or that crowd or trying to do all these sorts of things that maybe we're so used to now with social media and everything that's happening.
I would say to a certain extent, it's kind of like what Tyler Perry did.
Yeah, you find your audience, or rather you find the story you want to tell and you tell it, and your audience finds you.
Yeah.
Well,
Tyler,
essentially.
especially
Tyler Perry is not apologetic for the stories that he tells. He tells stories from what he's gone through, what he's experienced, and he tells situations and environments in the life that he's realized, and he's talking to his community. He doesn't care what anybody else says or what anybody else input is. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of even black people out there that don't like the Medea movies, for example, but Tyler Perry
yeah.
doesn't care. He's like, this is my experience. This is what I love. This is what I've been through, and I am showing you, and I know the community that I am trying to speak to.
Right, and I am not trying to take away from the authenticity of those stories. What I
Mm-hmm,
find curious is that when I see African American males being portrayed in animation, when I was growing up, it was the guy carrying the huge gun, the fighter, you know, um, and I don't even like in Akira, the guy that was the clown on the giant motorcycle, the clown gang. I don't know if he was
mm-hmm,
Japanese or black, but I know he was darker than everybody else in the animation. Because they were all kind of drawn. They were all kind of drawn stylistically. So there wasn't like, but with the clown makeup on, it looked like he was a dark guy with big gigantic red lips. And I've seen portrayals in Japanese culture, especially around candy, of the pickaninny imagery, and I don't know if that's been
mm-hmm.
erased from their
I mean,
culture
look
or
at
not,
Mr.
right?
Popo. Look at Mr. Popo.
Yeah, look at Mr. Popo. Ain't that the
Look,
truth?
look at Jinx and Pokemon.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is there's these negative
Mm.
stereotypes that if they were in a white American product, we would be in outrage and an uproar about, but because they're in Japanese culture, they seem to be accepted. And I'm just
I think
wondering why that is. Why is it
I
that black Americans or black people across the diaspora gravitate to something that is demeaning to them as a people, because as Americans we've exported our racism around the world, and maybe British people ahead of us.
I think you kind of answered your own question, and part of that though is Japanese culture, and as Black Americans, we can only do stuff that affect primarily Black America. We still have a voice across the diaspora and across these nations, but Japan is so rooted in their culture. I mean, it's like I feel
Homogenous.
like yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like that in Japan and their culture, they still keep on the traditions that are thousands of years old. Where in the black culture, we lost a lot of that.
Well, also you have to realize in Japan they just recently recognized indigenous Japanese. Because the people that we see that are running Japan aren't the indigenous inhabitants of Japan. The indigenous
Mm.
inhabitants of Japan was pushed way into the northern parts of Japan, and they're just now being recognized as their own culture, right?
Okay.
Not people who
Really?
migrated, recently, according to them, from Asia onto the island of Japan. But the indigenous people who migrated there, 40,000 years ago and still live there and still have they're the ones that put the tattoos on their face, the black
Ah.
tattoos, and they have like the big geometric patterns on their clothing. Those
Oh,
are
okay.
indigenous Japanese, and they're just now being recognized because uh, Japan is a very xenophobic place when it comes to outsiders.
I think that can be true of many cultures worldwide. Obviously, we're only exposed to mass media, the stuff we see on anime and TV and social media and such. So we're not maybe too informed on the ins and outs of every sort of subculture and everything that goes on in there. But just to get back to your original question about maybe why that anime specifically is accepted as opposed to white animation,
Things
I
are accepted
do
in
keep going
Japanese
back to
animation
the
that wouldn't be accepted in a traditional American
yeah, yeah.
animation. Yeah.
I think there's this sense of maybe here, but perhaps we're a little lenient due to lack of exposure
Okay.
to black people with the Japanese, the East's culture entirely, and how they're not as exposed per se to the West or America, where half the
Well,
population is black.
I mean, black people in America shit out our culture though. Like it's going on and stuff. We'll come up with a new word, and it'll be around the world and popular. You know what I mean?
No, black people are definitely the thought leaders when it comes to American culture. I mean, we brought jazz to Europe, right, in World War One. So if you think about what is our biggest export, it's our invention of Americana and American culture that is then consumed by the world. But the problem that I see is that culture is being shaped by people that aren't us, right? What they choose to export is not being dictated by us. Well, until recently through social media, but have we internalized a lot of stereotypes, and are we perpetuating those stereotypes? Because I think it was gangster that the K-pop kids got together and freaking trolled Donald Trump on our behalf, and all the
Yeah, that
people that
was
got together around Black Lives Matter. You know,
that was awesome.
yeah, that was awesome show of support and solidarity. So I think the generation that's coming after us, and meaning you guys, um, is way more worldly and way more aware and way more multicultural than at the time that I was in nerd culture at your age, right? You know,
So
the
Oh,
communication wasn't there. The ability to communicate
so
with anybody anywhere in the world wasn't there.
so the expectation though. So my question is we're talking about history and black culture. Do you think the history Black Lives Matter has affected the culture historically to the point where in the next 5 years we're going to see more not retellings of black story white stories to black stories, not where we might see a couple more characters that are black,
No, I
but
think you've already
full
seen it
on.
happen, man. I think you've seen it. It started with the Watchmen. Uh, uh,
mm,
Keenan. What was it? Keenan Peele. He took the racist thing that you can have in science fiction and horror, which was Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, racist dude, right? And he
Yeah,
turned that into the blackest thing on TV this year. So I
yeah.
think that now that black people are in control of telling their own stories, you get a more nuanced and variety of stories, because if you leave it up to white people to tell your story, they'll leave out a lot because it puts them in a bad light, right? You can't
yeah.
talk about any time black people came here where they weren't being abused and used, right? And the myth of America is that, we came over here, we carved the country out of the wilderness, and we built the country, with the sweat of our tears, and we pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps. Well, you can't tell that story if a Native American in the room. You can't tell that story if an African American's in the room. You can only tell that story if only white people in the room. And I think
So
but is it the same thing in nerd culture? Are we imitating other people's culture, or are we creating something that's authentically black and unique the way we've always done, from music to art to any media or anything that we've touched? We've made it unique, and made it exceptional. Are we doing the same thing in nerd culture? And can there be a uniquely black nerd culture experience separate from the dominant culture?
so I
That's
have a question for L and RK. You
that
know what I mean?
actually the original topic was is our historically our blackness, is it has it been narratively telling in the nerd culture, the things we've been consuming in this, you know what I mean, when Lee was saying you guys exported jazz to Europe, I'm thinking along the same lines. Has our stories been taken and then repackaged to us, and then now we're consuming them, and now we're saying, hey, we'd like to retell those, but like how they were originally by us.
So I honestly think that our black stories until now have been kept from us, right? Over time, and they trickle feed this in.
Through
I
through
kind of feel
through through
like,
the educational system, you mean, Chris?
yeah, I really well,
Through
like,
standardized
you know how many
education. Yeah, okay.
black people don't know that black people built the White House, or
The
or
majority of
half the
Americans don't know
monuments.
it.
They don't know it. You know how much they grazed over slavery in history, in American history class? You get maybe 2 days. You know what I mean?
No,
And
you
I
get
kind
you
of
get two
feel
periods. You get Harriet Tubman, 1865, slavery is over. We fought a war over it. And then you
Civil
brought up
rights
again with
movement.
Martin Luther King in 1965, and then you're not mentioned again in the history books.
And you might watch the movie Selma.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Maybe today you might watch a movie. But so my biggest thing is like you bring this up with this whole Black Lives Matter movement and everything like this. I'd like to get your guys' perspective. Do you think, because a lot of companies have come out and said, hey, we support black people, right? Black people, we support black people. Do you think they're just doing that to keep face, or do you think they're going to show some? Like Games Workshop came out and said we support black people. The only fucking thing they've done for black people is they put a black space marine on a book.
Well, they.
I haven't seen.
Personally, I feel that like for now anyway, right? And that's because I saw it in something that I'm doing currently, right? I won't name the job because like obviously NDAs and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
He's gonna get
But
fired.
yeah, but
Shoot
on the
fired.
job that I'm doing currently, right? We're making this video, right? And in the video, we put out like one of the clips says Black Lives Matter, right? Now, we had a meeting about, and they asked us to take that clip out. They had their reasons and whatnot, and whatever they could be, and they asked us to put something else in there instead, right? Cool. So my thing is that it builds on the fact that for companies to say something as bold as saying Black Lives Matter is even like it's not it's not saving face. It's actually a massive step because a lot of companies just don't have like they know what they're doing when they do that. That's saying that means huge. It's big. It's
Yeah,
like
making that
world
declaration.
changing. That
Okay,
message, that
Yeah,
message alone, that declaration alone, that already makes a whole bunch of people, especially white people, look at you differently. It immediately um, gives you a certain, outlook of you or whatnot. Even if you're not going to change your entire company slogan, even if you're not going to change and try to hire more black people, the fact that you're putting out there in a statement or in a newsletter or in social media that Black Lives Matter is already like, oh shit, okay.
but
Because a lot of companies to this day, a lot of massive big companies to this day, even with anything that went on, will not do that because they know for them they will be losing money if they did do that.
yeah. Let's.
I feel like
Well,
Money will be
Chris,
lost.
let's build on that Game Workshop analogy, right? Games Workshop put up that statement saying that they support diversity and that Black Lives Matter, and if you don't appreciate that, then you can just go fuck off. Was what their statement was, right? Like you
essentially,
won't
yeah.
be missed. I mean, they really told if you're a Nazi or a white supremacist, you can just go hit bricks. I've never seen a more full-throated endorsement of a company than that, right? And then other companies, because Games Workshop did it, they did it, right? Because Games Workshop is an 800-pound gorilla, right? They were able to
Yeah.
take the hit and keep moving. And people are like, well, if you get social justice warriors, if you get woke, you go broke. And then literally 2 weeks later, they had Ninth Edition launch, which was going to be the test, right, of whether or not people were going to buy that product or not. It was sold out in minutes.
So by them
So,
supporting,
so to so
saying,
so again, to make my point, companies who stand on the side of righteousness and stand with black people will not only get the support of black people, but will get the support of white people that aren't assholes. And if you're in cosplay and you're in tabletop gaming and you're in any other kind of movie making, video, do you want to be around people who have those type of ideologies and support those beliefs? Because right now in America, there's 70 million people that said that they were okay with a fascist form of government and a white supremacist form of culture.
oh yeah,
Exactly.
they were okay with, but so my thing is yeah, they did this full throated throat punch. So what they did is they're like, these guys, all the racist people already have thousands and thousands of dollars in their models, right? These are dudes that have been playing for years that buy models here and there. They're not new people coming in. By saying this, I feel like they've opened up to a different market that they say they accept this, but they already got the other people's money. But where you can say I support black people and women, people of color, but you can say it. But where's the products that say you saying it? You know
Well,
what I
Space
mean?
Marines
Yeah.
are great. You can paint them any color you want, right? And I think that being a big a ship as GW is going to take time for them to turn, right? I mean,
Mm.
look at
Well,
the
I
whole
mean,
fiasco with the salamanders. You know, they were
but
black,
and
they're not
that's
black, and that's dictated
that's
by who's at the top of the company and who's leading it. And GW has had a change of leadership over time.
yeah, yeah. I'm not. So I'm playing the devil's advocate in this
Okay.
whole thing, and I do understand. But they just released that book that I was telling you guys about, telling you about the other day. The third Horus Heresy, the Attack on Terra book. There's only one black company in the whole fucking book, right? From Africa, the African hive. And in the end of the book, they turned to Horus, and that was it.
Jesus.
They turned to the traitor legions. They made him evil. They demonized him. And the whole time of the book, they had integrity officers that were killing these people because they when they said, "Oh, I want to go home. I'm afraid." These people got conscripted. So they pretty much had these masters bringing 20 million black people from Africa to go fight at Terra, and then in the end, they ended up turning bad anyway. You know what I mean? That's I've read it. There's 500 and some books. There's very few books with black people in it. There's a couple characters like Mercedes Alaton. She was described as being dark of skin. You know what I mean? But she ends up dying too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
So
just to
again,
put,
if we allow other people to write our stories, that's how they're going to be written.
yeah, yeah. No, it's just on the same line of thinking as Chris there to play devil's advocate as well. It's there's still a lot of greed at the top of the list of things that are important to corporations, and even some companies that do say they stand with black people and Black Lives Matter. A lot of that was certainly just to go along with the trend because that's the wave of things we're going. And it is important that they say they're with us, but it's also important to show that they're with us. And that's every day. You know what I mean? That's do we have representation? Are there people in your company who are people of color, who are people like me and like you? And
People making
that's the
decisions.
precisely that's the changes we're looking for.
Right.
It's fine to post a picture and say you're with us, but are
Are you
you
physically?
really?
Yeah.
As exactly, yeah, exactly. But yeah, just to give back a little bit, RK, I don't know if you're there, but a lot of what you and I experienced growing up in terms of nerd culture was Americanized. Everything came from America, TV, gaming, online, everything we were exposed to very late on in life, towards our late teens. It was very Americanized. So, my question to you, just to make it a little bit more personal of a question, is in terms of your Africanness as a Black African, did you feel that maybe going into the nerd culture, you didn't feel like you fit in, not only as a Black man, but also as an African Black man?
Um, I think for me it was more as a black man because for me I was I was like I've said before, I was very fortunate enough to live the life that I did. My parents worked extremely hard, so we lived in like, especially when I started like going to school and I actually started like remembering my life. We lived in a white neighborhood, and I went to a very white school, especially like in my younger years. So the my heritage and my Africanness or my South Africanness, as you would say, it wasn't really pressured on me. You know, um, even in the fact that like my mom always wanted me to have like a more English accent because of the school that I was going to, and like English was like mainly the language that we spoke at home. But when I started finding the nerd culture, when I started like making friends that were nerds and were in that kind of space, it was very much a factor of, because when I started out, my two friends that introduced me to the nerd culture, one was black and one was Indian. But then when I started like looking for it, I'll never forget when I went to the mall one day and I was looking for the Dragon Ball Z game Budokai, right? And I was asking my brother and a lot of people in my family, like, where can I get this game? Where can I get this game? And no one knew. There was no one that knew. Like, even I remember my dad was like, I have no idea where to get this game for you because, like, he just didn't know. And it's only when one of my friends across the road, who was a white kid, came over, and I was like, damn, I'm really looking for this Budokai game. And he was like, oh, you can just go to the mall. There's a shop, you can go buy it from there. I'm like, wait, what? And I remember I went to that shop and everybody in that shop was white. And I was like, I felt so out of place. I was like, wait, what's going on? And I remember me as a kid, like I even realized then, it was just this feeling of I'm maybe not meant to be here. It was this feeling of like, am I stepping into a world that I'm not, welcomed in a way? Because all the kids in the store were white. The people behind the counter were white. Like nearly every single thing I saw around me is like the posters of like, these games and everything, they're all white. So it was like, damn, okay. Huh. Am I wrong for liking what I'm liking?
Mm.
And that's probably was my a first initialness of like, maybe this shouldn't be my thing, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, maybe this shouldn't be like what I drive for. That's when I started focusing more on sports, because that's what my brother pushed me towards. My brother very much, he pushed me towards sports and football. My mom did the same thing, my dad also the same thing. So I was like, oh, okay, then sports and hip hop, that's what I should be focused on, not gaming and anime and all that kind of stuff. Because like walking into that store, I just didn't feel welcome. And not because the people, they weren't welcoming, it was just the space and surroundingness of it. It just didn't feel welcoming. It's only later on in life when I grew up and I started realizing that, hold on, there are other people out there like me, you know, so I shouldn't feel so ashamed. But no, it was definitely, I never felt welcomed at all. That's for damn sure.
It's interesting. I'm always thinking about the topic of the self, essentially identity, self identity. How do you identify when you first introduce yourself? For me, gentlemen, for the longest time, I've always identified myself by my interests, and those have been things in the nerd culture. And I've found that a lot of the time, when you do come across different races, different ethnicities, you do certainly, as someone black, having these sorts of interests, it's suddenly like you're not one with your blackness. Like that is separate to nerd culture. Like you can't have interests outside
Yeah,
of things that are
very
specifically
true.
black.
The amount of times I was called a coconut.
You
Yes.
know, you hear that phrase so often. Like you're only black because of your skin color, and you're not
Yep.
actually black.
Oh my God!
That sort of thing.
So that's what we were. That's what I made that conversation, that because of being an affluent black male makes it really hard. Um, for the fact of that, like you said, being called a coconut because of your skin color. I I identified as first and foremost, and I think the question, as a nerd. It shouldn't matter my identity beyond that. My skin
Mm.
color should never come into question about my identity, but it does. And that's the sad part. And that's what we're trying to get away from. You know, that I'm when white people see me, they see me as a black man. When black people, when I see myself, I should see myself as a nerd. I'm a gamer. I love anime. I love comic books. I love movies. I love Marvel. That is what encompasses me. If you were talking to me on the phone, you did not see me, you did not who I am, and we talked for months, and I never mentioned a thing about my color, you would never know. But I'm not ashamed of my blackness. I'm not trying to hide it. But that's what I identify as. You know what I mean? And everybody should too. Should be able to identify as a nerd before you have to identify as a black man.
Well, you show up as a black man. They can see you're black.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's not something that you have to announce. Like I said, when you walk into a room, they know what color you are. So what we're talking about is, what should be and what is. And I rather prepare
Mm.
young people for what is
Than
than
what
have
should
them
be.
disappointed by what should be, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that looking at it from across the diaspora, I think that you will find that there is a lot of young uh, people of African origin that are grappling with these same type of issues no matter where they're at, because we've exported racism, right? It's built into the media that we're consuming. And white people are also consuming that same media and getting the same message. So now we have an opportunity to create our own media, which is why I created my company, to make sure that our stories were told by us, that we had representation at the table, right? So that if a young black kid came and sat down and he wanted to play a war game, he had an army that he could be proud of that represented him. He didn't have to play an army of somebody else that didn't give a shit about him, you know? So I think it's important that we have representation, because your experience going into the store and only seeing white people on the package, which is what kept me out of Warhammer for 20 years. I remember when Warhammer
Yeah.
first got released, it was a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys with crew cuts fighting demons. And I'm like,
Oh
I don't
man,
see
we
me here. I don't see myself as part of this
so on the female
community. And I think
perspective,
that people taking the steps to include black people in the imagery is the first step on a much longer road to having black people making decisions in the boardroom. And I look at how Eric Lang stepped down from Cool Mini or Not. And that was after the Black Lives Matter statements, and how they totally cut us out of the Origins Game Fair discussion panel around Black Lives Matters and representation at the gaming table. And why was that? Well, that was because everybody on the fucking board was a white man. And they don't want to hear it. Because it's an uncomfortable conversation that they don't want to have, because people don't want to face their own shit. They don't want to have to deal with it.
so so I don't want to beat this horn too much, but we, in this podcast, it's not just about black people, it's about women too. And Lee and I were
I
having
think we
this.
should maybe
No, it
stay
is
away
not.
from the
Wait till we
women
have a
topic
woman
until
on.
we
No, it's
actually
not.
have women
Before
on.
before you guys
We're not
jump
qualified to discuss women. We're not
before
women.
you jump on my ass,
I'm going to.
this is about Games Workshop and how so when they first came out 30 years ago, they had female space marines.
Yes.
Are you going to
And
mansplain the female struggle? Please don't.
no, I'm
I
not
beg you.
mansplaining the female struggle. I'm trying to explain to you guys how a company takes a perspective, and because they monetize the white look, they found out that white people sell. Games Workshop's been doing it. There was a whole article about it that white people sell. They took female space marines out. They used to have black space marines when they first came out. They took all that shit away because it wasn't selling numbers. Stores didn't want to restock it, right? So where I'm getting,
So was that because the stores were racist, or because the buying public was racist?
I honestly think it goes hand in hand.
Okay.
I think you make a product and you want to push a product, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't put that product in the light of the people that you want it to see, then and it only sees one group of people, then you're only going to get that group of people, and it's going to self-perpetuate. You have racism for 30 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's just now starting to turn around.
And the Black Lives Matter. Remember when Black Lives Matter came out with the Eric Gardner thing, and then it died.
No, Black Lives Matter started with Trayvon Martin, actually.
Yeah. So and then Eric Gardner was after that.
Yeah,
But
Eric Garner is what lit up the world. People were I had white people madder about racism than I was. And I said, "Oh, a cop killed a black guy. We call that Tuesday where I live at."
Yeah.
Yes.
But
I just
I
want
think
to take.
people being stuck at home doing COVID-19 and having it broadcast for 8 minutes and 46 seconds across their phones, because it was broadcast live, right? Everybody saw it. You couldn't deny it. It wasn't like, well, what did the black man do to deserve to get shot? Because when you see police cam footage, they always started from the point of the police yelling at somebody and then shooting them, right? So they can say, well, we don't know what happened before that. With when you look at that video, you see from beginning to end the police harassing him, the police stepping on his neck, people begging him, EMTs coming over, could you please get off his neck? And the guy was just killing him. It was murder. It was state-sanctioned murder, where 4 cops stood around and watched a 5th cop murder a man. And that struck a chord that you couldn't turn away from because you couldn't go to work to get away from it. You couldn't deny it because everybody was stuck at home. And it lit up not only America, Britain, Europe, France. I mean, people all over the world were. So I don't know how it fell in South Africa. We don't get South African news here in America. Sorry.
It was we certainly heard about it. We certainly were up in arms to some extent, but there is a larger crisis here that's going on. This giant femicide, gender-based violence is our biggest issue at the moment.
Gender-based
And to be
violence, you
outside,
said?
gender-based violence. That's correct. Yes,
Okay.
the killing and raping of women.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that's like literally every day. I don't even know how many. I don't know what the statistic is, but it's terrible.
Right. Well, it's a similar thing going on here with Native American women where they're getting killed and then nobody's investigating. I think it's a serial killer myself. But their homicides are not investigated. Are y'all having that same trouble in South Africa where they're not being investigated because they're women?
The weird thing is that so there was a I guess you could call him a senator. That's the equivalent I'm trying to think of
Okay.
in here. So there was a senator who was charged for raping his twin daughters.
Get out of here.
And then the courts, I believe, I don't know what the word was, but they lowered his bail, or his bail essentially was softened so he could easily, be let go. And then the charges were dropped, and now he's back in the Senate.
After raping his twin daughters.
That's correct. Yeah.
And
so
yeah.
It's a massive ongoing issue
that's deep.
Yeah, that we are trying. But just to get back onto the podcast, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, once again. Podcast is something of a safe haven for young Black nerds who find themselves maybe, out there wondering, are there people like me? Are there people going through things I'm going through? And maybe we can help them a little bit with their struggle.
And navigate that space, yeah, from experience.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again, gentlemen. I think that is our time. I want to thank RK Chris Lee, our sponsors, Gaddis Gaming. Please check out their Kickstarter.
Always love being here.
Thank you. Please check out their Kickstarter, Empire's Fall New Game. Check it out. Check out gaddisgaming.com, I believe. Yes, that's correct. Check out the YouTube page as well, Gaddis Gaming. Who's at the Table, I believe. There's a playlist underneath the YouTube channel, Gaddis Gaming.
Comment and share with those that you think might find it interesting. And also, everybody needs to shout out one other Black nerd.
That is correct. We always try to do recommendations at the end of each episode just to give light to some Black creators. Chris, you got one?
Oh man, Zeno Robinson. He is a Black anime dub. He does dub for anime. He's a voice actor, and he voices Hawks in My Hero Academia. He you can find him at Zeno Robinson at on Twitter.
Is that with a Z?
What's that?
Z. I was just wondering how you spelled that first name.
Zeno. Yeah, he voices forgot he's the Black guy on sorry, it's super sorry, he voices the Black guy on Fire Force, the one
the one Black guy.
The one Black guy. Yeah.
He does the there is only one Black guy in Fire Force, isn't there?
Yeah.
As far as I've seen.
Yeah, he voices the one Black guy in Fire Force.
So you can't miss him.
And
he voices the one Black guy in Fire Force.
All right, Lee, you got anyone for us?
Yeah, I'm gonna shout out Blurred Without Fear. He reviews comic books and nerd culture from a Black perspective. So Blurred Without Fear, you can find him on YouTube. Really good commentary if you're into comic books.
Awesome. RK, who you got for us?
I have a YouTuber. His name is the Keith Crew. He talks about everything in terms of consoles, anime, gaming, and then he makes the Keith Crew.
Okay.
Yeah, the KEEF Crew.
Yeah. Okay, so he smokes pot.
Thank
He
you.
makes
Thank you.
little like cool skits and stuff like that. He's really funny actually.
Awesome. We'll definitely check that out. My recommendation is a little bit of a shout out, not so much of a recommendation, to a young black woman, Tanisha Bracken Hux.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh
For
no.
inclusive African American hairstyles in Animal Crossing. And after about 40,000 signatures, they finally put some in. So shout out to her, Tanisha Bracken Hux. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Okay. And she made sure that people had black hair in Animal Crossing.
She
Oh,
made
is
her
this?
voice heard, and it was, and a new update, and they released some more inclusive hairstyles for
Yeah,
African people of African descent. Absolutely wonderful.
nice,
That's
nice.
cool.
That is a struggle in Animal Crossing.
Well, it's a struggle in most games, but as always, thanks you guys again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
All
Thank you,
right, have a
everybody.
good night.
Cheers.